Last summer, Archbishop Vigano warned us about those who intended to dissolve the social order and rebuild it according to the Masonic ideal, Salve et Coagula, which as many of you know is represented in the Masonic idol Baphomet. And coincidentally, on that fateful day in Washington, a man dressed like a minotaur stood up in celebration at the seat of the President of the U.S. Senate. Is this picture the fulfillment of Vigano's warning? In other words, was Vigano right? But first, as always, we start with our mission. Always remember, God created us for this time and for this place. If we learn this faith, if we live this faith, if we share this faith, what will the next 100 years look like? Join the mission. Did you see my Terminator video? I'm guessing you didn't. Apparently, I said one word in that video that Skynet didn't like. So that video got throttled. I'll link it at the end. Please be sure to check it out. But now on to Vigano. The events of last summer were surreal to say the least. Over the course of our lives, we've all witnessed strange events. But what was peculiar about last year is how there was a never-ending series of peculiar events. I, for one, can't think of another time in all of world history like this. And in the midst of this confusion and turmoil, Archbishop Vigano stepped forward, releasing a letter which put these events in their proper context. And that was really important because we were all shaking our heads, wondering what was going on. I remember thinking here, I made videos wondering, am I going crazy? Is this the end of the world? Is society collapsing? But Vigano put all of these events into context. In his letter, he said, it's quite clear that the use of street protests is instrumental to the purposes of those who would like to see someone elected who embodies the goals of the deep state and who expresses those goals faithfully and with conviction. It will not be surprising if in a few months we learn once again that hidden behind these acts of vandalism and violence there are those who hope to profit from the dissolution of the social order so as to build a world without freedom. Salve et Coagula, as the Masonic adage teaches. And that Latin phrase is a reference to the Masonic or demonic idol Baphomet. But what he said next is what I think really stood out to all of us. He said, before the power of prayer, the deceptions of the children of darkness will collapse. Their plots will be revealed. Their betrayal will be shown. Their frightening power will end in nothing, brought to light and exposed for what it is, an infernal deception. And to many of us, these words, they were reassuring during all of that turbulence. But even more than that, they weren't just reassuring. They seemed to have a prophetic ring to them. There seemed to be a fatherly promise, like, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. And as such, we expectantly waited for these words to be fulfilled. But now, here we are. And what are we to make of all of this? Pardon me for interrupting. This is just a quick reminder that God created you and me for this time and for these challenges. And the way that we respond now will determine the next 100 years. So be sure to subscribe to this channel, and together we will learn this faith, we will live this faith, and we will share this faith. Join the mission. So here we are. It certainly seems as though Vigano's warnings did not bear out. And we're all just wondering, what happened? Was he just plain wrong? Was our hope misplaced? Was all this a pipe dream? Should we just disregard the Archbishop's words? But I just can't seem to do that, because there's a few things that prominently stick out to me, most notably this. First off, let me say I don't think it's beneficial to anyone to overanalyze these words, but I just can't get past this crazy coincidence in which something very similar to the very idol which Vigano references suddenly stood before all of us and was on all of our TV screens. This picture seems to have had a lasting, dramatic impact on the current direction of our country. Can that just be coincidental? Am I overreading this? Is this simply just some crazy costume? Or is it an explicit icon, a symbol? I mean, does this mean something? And if so, what? And if I'm right about this, if Vigano's words were indeed prophetic, what does that say about the rest of Vigano's letter? Remember, he gave us this hope, a hope for victory. A victory which apparently did not come. But consider this. What if it had come? What if we had won? What would that have looked like? I think we all live in an unfortunate time in which all of us have placed all of our hope in this political machine in Washington, the Coke versus Pepsi routine. And maybe it's time that we realize that God's victories will ultimately not come through Washington, through Coke or Pepsi or whoever. Maybe it's time that we realize that those people are just there to serve themselves. Our hopes, our faith, our values are not their hopes, their faith, or their values. And so then, what would it mean for us to celebrate another victory of Coke over Pepsi? It would not stop the parade of this society towards paganism. A political victory in the manner which we were all hoping for would have done nothing more than maintain the status quo. So this here is where I want to come back to Viganos' letter, and I do not want to overlook his call to prayer, but pay close attention to what he says will be the effects of our prayer. He says, "It is necessary that the good, the children of light, come together and make their voices heard. What more effective way is there to do this than by prayer, asking the Lord to protect you, the United States, and all of humanity from this enormous attack of the enemy? Before the power of prayer, the deceptions of the children of darkness will collapse, their plots will be revealed, their betrayal will be shown, their frightening power will end in nothing, brought to light and exposed for what it is, an infernal deception." In what way can these words possibly make sense? I don't think these words are speaking of a return to the status quo, another Coke over Pepsi victory. I think it makes sense in these terms because by nature, evil seeks to consume everything. And as long as we stood in their way, we had the target squarely pointed on us. But now, we're no longer an obstruction to them. They have full power. Think here of the guy on the interstate who's tailgating you. Now, you can see him in your rear view mirror. He's cussing you out. He's losing his temper because apparently 80 just isn't good enough for him. I used to really lose my temper with this guy. I'd get into it, cussing, gestures, the whole 9 yards. Until one day I realized that the problem is not in here. The problem's with him. And I don't have to be involved at all. So then I just got out of the way. And something really amazing happened. Aside from me not losing my temper, what I saw that guy do, he flew right past me only to run up onto the next guy and do the same thing to him. You see, the problem was with him. It wasn't with me. Victory for Christians, like the victory of the cross, is very ugly, but it's very complete. Now, maybe after our 54-day novena, God indeed intended to respond, but not in a small way, another Coke over Pepsi victory. What would that have done? That would have just maintained the status quo. When I say that, what I specifically mean is the continual slaughter, which I can't really talk about because of Skynet, but you know what I'm talking about. Maybe for God, victory does not simply mean a reduction in that number. This is the key to my whole point here. For God, victory does not mean a reduction in that number, like a bill was signed or an executive order was signed or a law was passed that ultimately reduced that number, because ultimately a court overturns it anyways. That doesn't seem to be victory for God. Victory for God means the end of that diabolical ritual altogether. And those two things are dramatically different. I think what Vigano is describing here is not simply a political victory, a return to the status quo, because that doesn't seem to be congruent with his words. Before the power of prayer, the deceptions of the children of darkness will collapse, their plots will be revealed, their betrayal will be shown, their frightening power will end in nothing, brought to light and exposed for what it is, an infernal deception. What provokes this destruction? It's not Coke beating Pepsi again. We know that, because political victories have never produced this. Why should we ever hope that they would? That's misplaced hope, because they have never done that. Vigano is telling us to pray because now that they are in power, what will they do with that power? They will consume themselves, because evil eventually always consumes itself. In that sense, I still cling to these words, no matter how desperate the situation gets. Remember, after the French Revolution, the revolutionaries turned on each other. In that sense, really all we have to do is just keep praying and be patient. Remember, God is never late. He's never early. He's always on time. And that's where we can place our hope. So this last week, I was really shocked to see this video from Arnie seeming to imply inflammatory assertions about Americans just like me. So today, I'm wondering, why does Arnie want to terminate me? But first, as always, we start with, oh, don't worry, I'll be back.